and welcome. My name is Susan Derwin. I'm the director of the Interdisciplinary Humanities Center. And for those of you who are visiting for the first time, I'm going to tell you what our mission is. The mission of the IUC is to advance knowledge about human experience in cultural, historical, and social contexts, and to do so through programs that foster human agency, social connectivity, and civic empowerment. And I'm delighted to welcome you all here today to hear Erin Huey speak in the IUC's year-long public events series, Critical Mass. For the last 6 months, we've been considering transformative moments and tipping points in society, and Erin Huey's work through amplifying.org has itself been a significant creative force for social change. Huey's visual interventions into public narratives have focused on a wide array of issues, including environmental justice, criminal justice reform, indigenous resistance, immigration and migration, and gun violence prevention. Erin Huey is National Geographic photographer, a Stanford media designer, and founder and chief creative of amplifying.org. As a photographer, Huey has created over 30 stories, including cover stories for National Geographic magazines. As one of the first global ambassadors for Stanford's D School, and as a media experiments fellow there, Huey focused on experiments using the human-centered design process in both the analog and digital worlds. His use of a combination of art and storytelling as a tool for social change has resulted in the creation of the Pine Ridge Community Storytelling Project, the Sherpa Photo Fund, the global art phenomenon called We the People with artist Shepard Fairey that appeared at Women's March rallies around the world, and a recent series of pre-colonial history and cultural heritage lessons in virtual reality that will become part of K-12 curriculum across the U.S. this year. His Bare Ears National Monument VR experience won the 2019 Webby for Best VR Interactive Design. And Erin Huey also shares something of great importance with LeBron James and Kelly Slater. They were all named among the top three coolest dads in America by fatherly.com. So without further ado, and with much anticipation, please help me welcome Erin Huey.
That last one is my favorite acronym. Number 3 dad. I want a t-shirt. I told my son I wanted a t-shirt that says number 3 dad. Yeah, amplifier. Okay, all right, I'll try that. I am going to tell a lot of stories today, and I'm going to try and weave them together in a way that makes sense. I'm going to show you guys a ridiculous amount of images, because that's what I make. This talk is going to meander a little bit, but bear with me, these stories will connect. At the heart of every one of these stories is this. They all come back to making art in community and the responsibility and impact of that role, especially when doing work at scale. That's why I think that a lot of this work, whether it's the photography or the art, is relevant to this critical mass theme, is this massive scale. They're all connected to big movements and moments in history, and they're all trying to either use or create critical mass. So I live 2 lives. I'm a National Geographic photographer, and I'm the founder and chief creative of amplifying.org, and I'm going to tell stories today that bridge those 2 worlds. Amplifier is a nonprofit design lab that builds art to amplify the voices of grassroots movements. And I'm really excited about this theme because critical mass is such a great topic for a series. It's something that I'm thinking about all the time in my personal storytelling. I'm always trying to figure out how to get something to critical mass, or if it's there, how to mobilize people around that energy to go and do something about it. Like we did with this campaign that you're looking at in this image. This was built in my backyard in Seattle. But before we get to the image on the screen here and others like it, I want to go way further back into my journalism, looking at some of of the stories of mine that led to the creation of projects like this. Both of my story-making lives have been amplifying the voices of communities I work with, and both of them scare me quite a bit, really, on every story and every assignment. I say that because of the scale. There is just so much at stake when we're working on stories like this. On most of these stories, I'm not working in a community like a neighborhood or a city or a state. We're often doing stories that will represent whole communities across all borders. Stories that cover and affect the entire diaspora of people, the entire people wherever they may be in the world. From groups like the Oglala Lakota in South Dakota, to the tribes of the Caucasus Mountains on the southern border of Russia, to the Sherpa of Nepal. I am taking their stories, I'm sorting and filtering them, and I'm rebroadcasting them back to the entire rest of the world. These are usually the biggest stories done about these communities for many decades, because that's what National Geographic does, that's what their reach is. So what's represented there matters. It really lasts. It lives in the libraries, and it's there for decades. It's never just the story of my encounter with a few people, like one man carrying a load up the Khumbu Icefall below Mount Everest, for example. It's the constant weight of responsibility to tell an entire people's story right. His people's story right. Because it's the story of their lives and their work and their legacy. Their elders, their children, their future, their spirituality, their ritual. And I feel responsible to these people because I don't just do drive-by stories. I live with them, and they share a piece of their lives with me, so I have to get it right. Because when the stories do go out, they go out to hundreds of millions of people. The magazine alone is translated into 33 different language editions. This was just one story I did on the Sherpas. The Instagram goes to 131 million people. By this summer, it will be 150 million. And we, the photographers, feed it with our own unfiltered, unedited storytelling. On any given story, if you don't get it right in all its complexity, you can bet that you are going to hear about that from an audience that big, from somebody, because there are a lot of experts out there in that audience. And there are so many definitions of what getting it right looks like, right? So you find yourself walking through a kind of endless minefield when you're telling any story of consequence like this. The posts get millions of views and millions of likes and sometimes tens of thousands of comments. So these days I don't really do stories without great consequences because there is too much at risk for all of us. So I'm having to evolve myself and sometimes the media landscape around me in order to appropriately represent these communities. So I'm going to share two kinds of visual storytelling today because I still use both of these medias and methods, and because they both involve the same complex communities and have many of the same solutions to navigating that minefield I talked about. Is there anybody in here that's in journalism courses or class? Is there anybody in here that's good? Because I'm going to talk about journalism for about 15 minutes. This one's for you. In the beginning of my photojournalism, I'm going to start here because it's where I really started going deep enough to get scared. I was shooting a lot of subjects back then, like the aftermath of the war in Iraq, the drug war in Afghanistan for the New Yorker, the New York Times. I was photographing mystic Islam all over the world because I was so freaked out about how Muslims were being portrayed in the US in the aftermath of 9/11. And the audiences for these stories, as I kind of upgraded in publications, kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and the stories went deeper and deeper and deeper. But I'm going to show you one story in depth now that's the deepest I went, where I got the most scared, and where I learned the most. This is the story that really changed my life forever. This photo essay I'm about to show is one that I don't show very often because it's really painful to show. But it's so formative for me that I can't really avoid it. And the discomfort in this story is really what made me and my media evolve. This is a story about an American prisoner of war camp in South Dakota, POW camp number 344. It's also known as the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, and it's now home to the Oglala Lakota. In 1824, the United States established the Bureau of Indian Affairs in the War Department, and it was downhill from there. If the Lakota had kept the land they were promised in the treaties, the map of the U.S. would look like this today. These are the people, great warriors like Red Cloud, Black Elk, Crazy Horse, and if you have ever heard of AIM, the American Indian Movement, or Leonard Peltier, or Russell Means, or the Wounded Knee Takeover of 1973, then you might know that Pine Ridge is ground zero for Native issues. I started photographing on Pine Ridge in 2005 as part of a superficial story about poverty in America. And it was superficial because in the beginning, it was literally just statistics. I had chosen this because it was on a stat sheet. Pine Ridge had been one of the poorest places in America for decades and had set records in nearly every category of misery and despair, which really was a legacy of colonization, forced migration, and treaty violations. 90% unemployment, a 70% school dropout rate, and a male life expectancy of 47, which is roughly the same as Afghanistan and Somalia, where it was at the time. And over time, it became really clear to me that those statistics came from a deep historical wound. On December 29, 1890, the U.S. 7th Cavalry massacred Chief Spotted Elk and 300 prisoners of war at Wounded Knee Creek, including many women and children, with the predecessor to the Gatling gun, and ended the Indian Wars. After that event, you could really say that a new era in Native American history began. Everything, I believe, can be measured before Wounded Knee or after, because that was the day the U.S. government openly declared its position on Native rights. They weren't interested in treaties. They were tired of sacred hills and ghost dances and all the other inconveniences of the Sioux, so they brought out their cannons. Today, the Oglala Lakota live in the shadow of Wounded Knee. Once I understood that, I stopped telling a story about poverty and gangs and statistics, and I started to tell a story about a prisoner of war camp. It was a story about a long and calculated genocide, a story about stolen lands. This was a story about how prisoners are still born into prisoner of war camps long after the guards are gone. As you can tell from these pictures, right, there is a lot of darkness in this work. It's a minefield, it's controversial, and it hurt. It hurt to make these pictures. But there is also an incredible light in this place. And I see it in a lot of these images. It comes through. Towards the end of my time shooting there, I started to put down my camera more, and I started to see more. In my time at the end of this project, I saw the resurgence of the Sundance. I saw a living, contemporary resistance. I saw the spirit of Crazy Horse, still alive today. So I spent 8 years traveling to and from Pine Ridge, and work eventually evolved to be about my family, about the people who call me brother and uncle. And the short intro, it's hard to do justice to the complexity of this story with just a 5-minute little carousel. So I usually like, at some point in this, to let my friend and mentor, he's a medicine man named Rick Two Dogs, do the speaking for his own people. Because I believe when you can hear their stories and their visions and their songs in their own words, it's always better than anything that I could say. So he's going to talk, I'm going to play something now. He's going to be talking about Black Elk's vision here as he starts, in case you can't hear it.
It was in Black Elk's vision, and he talks about the 4 ascents, or the 4 levels of his vision. The third ascent, or the third vision he saw, was that the people were in darkness, walking in darkness, and everybody was following their own path, and nobody was following like the right teachings or anything, and there was like a darkness over the land, like a cloud covered the people. lot of like chaos and a lot of misery and crying. But he walked among these villages and he saw 4 different villages. And then he saw in the vision where we passed beyond this and came to like a brighter time and a happier time. And in his vision he saw a flowering tree, a tree that bloomed with leaves, and there was birds in the tree singing. So his prediction is that by some way, he always believed that we would come out of this poverty and alcoholism and the sickness, all of this, the darkness, the suicide, the sexual abuse, we will come out of it eventually. And his beliefs was that it would be because of returning to our own teachings and our own language and our own culture.
So that was just the beginning, really. The larger story, the timeline of that American genocide would take way too much of our time today, and I would be openly weeping if I talked about it any longer. So I'm glad I made it through without doing that. But this, I hope, introduces the incredible discomfort inherent in capturing such an enormous story. You can imagine how complex it is to work in this community. There's no real way to get it right using my own images and aesthetic filter, because I'm part of the problem. To do it right, I had to look beyond my own photography. When you go this deep into a photo story, you really have to evolve sometimes, and I think my evolution was that over time I learned to listen more carefully to the community. As a journalist now at this point, I know that many of the best stories end up on the cutting room floor, many of the best parts of those stories, because they just aren't newsworthy or flashy or violent enough. The communities that we report on, they know this, and when we leave, they're left wondering not if, but how they will be misrepresented. This is the nature of our business. Stories are often shallow or lopsided. I get asked, how could you write about us and not include the buffalo? How could you not tell them about all of our scholars and athletes? And they're right to ask that. Often the answer is that there just isn't space and the editors just wouldn't put it in. Even in a 42-page cover story for National Geographic, it's really the nature of the editorial itself. If you have too many storylines, the reader gets lost. Luckily, in the digital space, we have more room to expand. And I know that when I'm telling a story about a place or people, my job as a journalist is not to tell every single story of every person in the community, of course, but when I go to places like Pine Ridge and I look into the eyes, I have to look back into the eyes of people who have seen the magazine or seen these stories. I want so badly to give them a chance to tell their own story the way they see it. And when I started this project with National Geographic, there was no way to do that. We didn't have Instagram and Snapchat to hashtag communities. So this is like way back in the Wayback Machine. 8 years ago, I built a way to do that while I was working at Stanford with a visionary artist that works at the web named Jonathan Harris on a storytelling site he had built. And we were trying to figure out how to get stories from sites like his embedded into big media sites. Like so many people had been building these community storytelling sites where, of course, everybody could pile their stuff in, but then only 100 people saw it, right? Or maybe 1,000. How could we get things like the stories that would go into these smaller websites embedded directly into something like a National Geographic. The world did not need another new website. We needed a way to mainstream these into big publications that already had tens of millions of subscribers. So these people could tell the stories that they wanted to tell about their own kids, about their own history, and what they wanted for their own future. Ultimately, for me, this project was more about redesigning the relationship between communities and big media than it was about designing a digital platform, because digital platforms are going to just keep changing. And it worked. We succeeded in getting National Geographic to launch this project. I don't think I could do it today. I think the lawyers would stop me. This was in 2012. The magazine embedded a massive community storytelling project in their own website, co-launching the cover story. Content streamed in completely unedited from the community. There were no checks on it for spelling, profanity, copyright infringement. They could tell whatever they thought represented them best. There was no limit to the number of words or stories, nothing too big or small. 300 and some stories came in, and there were all kinds of incredible examples. This guy told a story about the first racist he ever encountered. We had people telling stories about really intimate things from their families. This was Megan Redshirt-Shaw talked about her first Sundance, about her family's history with the Sundance. We had people doing jokes, reading poems, writing letters, like publishing letters from prison that their relatives had sent them. Was a pretty incredible way to share stories. It even allowed for people to tell us when they thought we got something wrong. So it allowed for that voice of dissent, which I think is such a beautiful thing. This was a young photographer named Angel White-Eyes wrote this story that she called Rant. And it went straight to the National Geographic website, and it essentially called us out for failing to see the reservation right. She was right, we can't see it right, we can't see all of it. But everybody that put their stories in added all of those layers themselves. So we had people talking about their dance at the powwow, about the birth of their child, about their family lineage and heritage. People made prayers, because some of these were audio stories. Made prayers for their children. They talked about really simple day-to-day things like gathering wood with elders, about their dad, the motorcycle rider, about building their house, about what they think it means to be Lakota, and how different that looks, about their homecoming, about games that they play, traditional games, about food economies. About their traditions, what they make. So in a lot of ways, this breakthrough project from 2012 is super dated, but this way of joining professional storytelling with community-generated work, in my mind, is the perfect way to tell a story as complex as Pine Ridge. And a lot of stories are as complex as Pine Ridge in our world. A lot of these big movement stories that we hear about every day with gun violence and with immigration, they are this complex. This was a way for me to both do my job and get out of the way. And I do believe there's a future for collaborative storytelling like this that can bring big brands like Nat Geo and Humanities into a shared experience. This grid of stories and community voices will tie into the art soon, I promise, you'll see. In the middle of this Pine Ridge project, before the community storytelling, I was invited to do a TED Talk. And that was really a defining moment for me, because when I went on stage, I did what I'd always been told that we weren't supposed to do as photojournalists. I picked a side. I was not indifferent. And my TED wish, what I shared at the end of my talk, was this: give back the Black Hills. It's not your business what they do with them. And that was when I decided I needed to leave the pages of magazines for stories like this occasionally to try something different. It wasn't the job of National Geographic to do what they would call activism or movement building. If I wanted to do that, I was going to need a new way to move images, a new way to reach audiences. So I was kind of this incredible constraint that really created a lot of innovation. I hit the ceiling and I had to go straight sideways to start building again from scratch. And I had this dream: what if I could collaborate with an artist and take these images to the streets in a street art campaign. And what if I could get the greatest street artist in the world to do that with me? And it worked. I was lucky to find my collaborator in Shepard Fairey, one of the most prolific street artists of all time. Shepard is known for the Longest Hope campaign and the ubiquitous Obey propaganda campaign. And he helped me turn my photographs into images like this, with the words that the community wanted me to put out into the world. We also worked with Ernesto Urena, an artist and activist working primarily on immigration border issues. Together we collaborated to turn the people's messages from Pine Ridge into illustrations like these. We used those to make posters and stickers. We made thousands, we made tens of thousands that went up on walls in dozens of cities around the country. The majority were put up by strangers who all believed in the message. Many of whom downloaded the free graphics on the website that we set up that also included teaching tools and other resources. Now, originally, I made all the art-free downloads at high resolution on these websites so that we could provide plausible deniability for illegal wheat pasting. I had learned that from Shepard because he had gotten arrested in Boston, and they had said, well, your art is all over the city and it's on all of the stop signs, and they hauled him into court when he showed up to go to one of his museum shows. And so we started to put all the art up free as free downloads with a little warning to understand local laws before pasting. It also made the spread of the work unlimited, and that's still the foundation of really all the work that we do with this art. So people downloaded that art and they carried it. They carried it to like KXL road blockades and sent us pictures. They made banners for community workshops. They carried them in protest, and this was the beginning of something big. It started to move much further than we expected. But like the photography I was doing, it needed to evolve from being art designed by a few to art designed by as many artists as we could find and fund. We wanted to make an art machine for social change that just churned out art. Art would sell, and any money that came out of it went back into reproducing that same art by a factor of 10 bigger. If that sold, it would come back in and we'd move that art back out at a factor of 100 bigger. This is how Amplifier came to be. This is where movement support and movement building really began in my life. From that work on treaty rights and land rights, we eventually expanded work on immigration reform and criminal justice reform. We worked on projects with Van Jones and his organization Cut 50, who were trying to cut the prison population by 50% in 10 years. We ran cool little experiments with like a very scrappy little budget like this one. We took over hundreds of thousands of dollars in advertising with $500 of black and white stickers. We made a community storytelling project on these black and white stickers, and then we put them all over New York City subway ads. And we didn't have to pay for it. And what was exciting about street art like this and takeovers of the ad space was that they don't get shifted around by the algorithms that move social media and news algorithms that show us only what we think we want, what they think we want to see. Art like this in the streets, I think, has the power to wake people up in a way that journalism can't. It stands out. It stops you in the street. Our world is so oversaturated with imagery, with great imagery. There is too much amazing imagery. But this stuff stands out. It doesn't care what you want to see on your way to work. It's there to confront you. It steals the space, and it tells you things like, prisons don't work. This approach is key to what we do at Amplifier. We believe that in times of uncertainty, art is more than beauty and decoration. It can be used as a tool. What kind of tool depends on how you hold it. It's a megaphone for voices that need amplifying. It's a bridge that can unite movements under shared values and common symbols in ways that other mediums can't. But for all the tools that art can be, for Amplifier, it is a compass pointing to the future that we want to live in. And I use that often. It's a compass. We don't make art that says no. We make art that points to where we want to go. So this was the big moment when our real work began. We went from working on projects kind of here and there, whenever there was funding or energy, to working 20 hours a day. This was the moment we saw very clearly where there was energy, where there was fear, and where there was a need for something to push back with and something to hold on to. This is also where we got back into community storytelling and community voice. So in the days after the election, when we realized that the American narrative was being hijacked and was leaning more heavily than normal towards open and even proud racism, sexism, xenophobia, and violence, we realized we had to take the narrative back, and we set to work, like a lot of people that gathered in their kitchens and said, oh my God, what are we gonna do? I knew what tools I wanted to use. I had already started building. I knew it would be Shepherd. We'd already talked. I knew how I wanted to deliver it. I knew what communities we would work with. And I knew where the moment was and how it would be unveiled. So we set to work. The one part we didn't know yet exactly is what we would say. So we convened several nights of what we called language labs, and we still run these whenever we start a project. We got together thought leaders from around the country, community members, with rooms full of people like the people in this room. It was artists, organizers, journalists, poets, educators, political and social influencers, and other leaders to answer the question, what do you say when the whole world is watching? We asked that question because we knew the target. The target was Inauguration Day. We knew that every camera in the world would be pointed at one place on that one day, and we really believed we could get the attention of every one of those cameras. And we wanted to use that moment to send a message. Our goal was an ad campaign in the nation's biggest newspapers. But we wanted to work with the community to figure out what it was that we needed to say. So through those language labs, over 4 nights in New York and the Bay Area, we landed on, through community, we the people, and a series of untouchable phrases that couldn't be pegged to a political party or a side. Phrases that could be a compass for both red and blue states. We the people defend dignity, are greater than fear, and protect each other. This art was not made in an office. It was made in and by the communities that were affected, by photographers and artists who were affected. From the beginning, we knew that we wanted it to be crowdfunded because we wanted people power. The idea was that for every $1 donated, we could print and distribute 6 physical copies of the art in the biggest newspapers in the country. The hack of the papers meant also that we had someone to do the distribution for us. What we had figured out was, I don't know if you remember, but in the run-up to the inauguration, they had made it so that you couldn't carry any banners on any of the inaugural route. Really, for the first time ever. There had always been pretty strict restrictions, to be fair, but they really made it so you couldn't carry any placards. But nobody can tell you you can't carry a newspaper. That was the whole idea behind this entire campaign. And just for the record, this campaign was for Inauguration Day, not for the Women's March. It just became associated with that because everybody kind of held back and then carried it on the next day. So I'm going to show you the original Kickstarter video that we used to try to get this public backing of this concept.
I think art can help to wake people up because when an image resonates emotionally, we want to get to the bottom of it, and art really helps to make people feel things that then they talk about.
We are the Amplifier Foundation. Our nonprofit funds collaborations between artists and grassroots movements so their messages can reach a wider audience. 8 years ago, Shepard Fairey made the iconic image that captured a period of hope in America. Today, we face very different times. In the wake of this year's presidential campaign, un-American things are becoming normalized. This moment calls for new images to disrupt the rising tide of hate and fear. We, the people, need to come together under new symbols of hope. In response to the current state of the nation, Amplifier has commissioned photographers and artists, including Shepard, Ernesto Urena, and Jessica Salgal, to create a series of images that remind us that our America is one of equal humanity and does not demean or discriminate. These ideas are not partisan. They're the foundation of America. And on Inauguration Day, with your help, we will make sure everyone remembers them. The tricky part is getting this art to you. Free speech in public spaces has rarely been as stifled as it will be on January 20th. There'll be parts of DC where signs and banners are prohibited, and ways to deliver you this art are limited. Luckily, someone already built an amazing distribution network for us. It's called the newspaper. On Inauguration Day, if this campaign succeeds, you will be able to buy a copy of the Washington Post with these images as full-page ads that you can carry into the streets, hang in your window, or paste on a wall. Every dollar you put into this campaign will buy 6 ads, printed and distributed for us. Amplifier will also be distributing these images at metro stops, out of the back of moving vans, at drop spots to be announced in the coming week, and on January 19th as free downloads. So what does the 21st century we look like?
We the people is the collective us, all of us, brothers and sisters in humanity that are in this together.
We are unity. You see me, I see you. It's the same.
The people that have been historically left out of the national conversation.
Yeah, these are all people that could be someone we know, and a friend, a child of a friend, a neighbor. That's America. That's us.
We the people will no longer be exiled, excluded, or eliminated from our America.
I want to be exactly who I am and have people accept me for that. If that's we the people, then I'm on board, you know?
We don't have any one easy solution, but we do know this. We are resilient. We must be indivisible. We must be greater than fear. We must defend dignity. And we must protect each other. So it worked. We broke a Kickstarter record when we raised $1.36 million in 8 days, with nearly 23,000 small donors. That was the record, the sheer number of people backing. So it became the back page of the Washington Post. There's the front and the back page on Inauguration Day. And it appeared as full-page ads in USA Today and the New York Times. I wanted to hit USA Today because I thought I could get to Motel 6s in Wyoming and Montana. We asked people to carry those papers with them to the marches, and I wasn't really sure whether people would actually do that or not, but they did it. Like, people pinned it to jackets, and they flooded the streets with them, and they did it by the hundreds of thousands. They filled Times Square. But what surprised us the most was we saw all these pictures of prints of all kinds of sizes that we did not distribute. We didn't send you pictures, we didn't send anything to Jackson Hole or Miami, Florida, but local print shops and personal printers in all of these places were working overtime to print the art the protesters had downloaded for free from the website. Same concept as the original project in 2010. So these are the stats for 1 week leading up to the Women's March. 193 countries, including North Korea, downloaded the art. 20 million page views in 7 days. Now, because of the free downloads, people were able to get really creative with how they use the art, from dresses to quilting clubs. We saw a lot of projections. A lot of people sent us pictures, like this huge projection on the side of the building in New York. This kind of smaller projection on a movie theater. People were making things like 25-foot tall art cubes in downtown LA. People were dressing up in the streets like the icons. People were making stamps out of this stuff. People got tattoos. And for those days of the marches, it was a sea of art. Really, I think, unlike anything we'd seen in a long time, maybe ever. By the numbers, I think it would be different if if the hope image was in the time of this internet, but from all the numbers that we found, this is the most viral political art campaign in history, just because of how it moved. And I knew it was really big and that it was taking off when, on the morning of the Women's March, somebody sent me this image from the Brandenburg Gate. We did not send art to the Brandenburg Gate. And it circled the world from Instagram posts that we saw in Malaysia, in Bogota, Colombia, in Kenya, eventually even to the summit of Everest. And of course, one of the bonuses and one of the things that we're always shooting for at Amplifier is that kind of third-party pickup. This stuff is constantly showing up on in places like CNN and on the front pages of stories about that time period, really getting hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars of ad buy equivalency. This was a cool little video of something too. We end up doing a lot of murals with Shepherd 2. This is one in Los Angeles that was put up just last year. So, one of the most interesting parts about that time surrounding the inauguration and the Women's March was when we launched our open call. This came out before the We the People work, and it was an experiment where we went to the country and said, do you want to be part of building the symbols for this march? And we asked the Women's March organizers, hey, do you mind if we do this? And they said, please, it doesn't cost us any money. We said, all right, we're after it, let's go. So in December of 2016, we launched a nationwide public call for art to support the Women's March in Washington. And in 8 days, we got 6,000 submissions. We had a panel of judges along with leadership of the Women's March who had the difficult task of narrowing the group down to 5 final poster graphics. The 5 were printed and distributed by Amplifier and then carried by tens of thousands. These were ones where I think we printed maybe 30,000 double-sided placards, and then people also did like the downloads and print at home. And we saw this at marches all around the world. These are just a few of the designs that people sent in out of the 6,000 in our online portfolio. All of them are still free downloads. It just keeps going and going and going. So the work toured, and we built environments and out of these for the spaces of different gatherings. We're really kind of energizing spaces for people that were convening to talk about things and work on these movements. And the formula worked so well that we did this again and again, and unfortunately there wasn't a shortage of marches or crises. But this became really the foundation of how we build this open call model. When the March for Our Lives, the build up to the March for Our Lives was happening, we ran an open call with Adobe, and we had thousands of people send in work, and most of that was focused on students and student artists. 3 of the top young student artists were brought out to DC to hand out all of their art in person, and the work was carried in the streets, it was handed out on street corners, distributed from roaming vans full of pallets of art, still one of my favorite parts. And then a lot of people were photographed with it, like these images would show up of people with this. And I know, like as a journalist, when I was covering events like back at like Bush's inauguration, way back, I remember trying to find things that would visually anchor my frames. I didn't just want like a mob of people with like pirate flags and stuff. I was looking for people that had a symbol of like what everybody was fighting for. So as a journalist, I knew that we needed these kind of anchor images for storytelling, and we do. Like the New York Times wants to photograph a kid holding that art more than just a big mass mob of human bodies. It says something. It says what they're fighting for. So I was able to really combine a lot of these ideas of my journalism and this art, and all of the digital spread that all of this art got. Last year we also did a lot of work launching an open call with Get Out the Vote artwork that will continue. A lot of people have asked how we curate. The committee is usually made up of a diverse panel of artists, activists, organizers from the affected communities. The results of these open calls always become the free downloads for communities to use when and how they want. The best of the best are printed and distributed with key partners in the streets or at their events. and the incredible diversity of aesthetics and perspectives we see when we look at these results of these open calls, these unfiltered voices, really is, I see a parallel with that same kind of diversity that was needed in all those layers when I was doing Pine Ridge. There's just so many more ways to tell these stories than I can see or than one artist can see. So what's next? There's a lot next, because it's going to be a messy year. Oh man. It's kind of exciting too. We're going for the kids. One audience that we didn't really expect, or one user group, was one that came to us really early. Right after We the People, we started getting all these messages from teachers either saying, we have this and we don't know how to talk about it, or we need this so that we can talk about it. And so we started trying to figure out how to build resources for teachers to talk about stuff that we already have that existed, just this core imagery. Because they were already doing this. Like, the teachers that sent us this was right after the March. They were already putting it in their classrooms. We hadn't built anything yet. So we built an amplifier educator group that started getting together ideas of how we could send out tools to go with this art. And we worked with teachers like these to get artwork that made sense for their classrooms and for what they needed to teach to, on a diverse group of subjects from the environment to American civics, bridging the divide that, to be honest, we thought their parents couldn't handle. We kind of, in the wake of a lot of this, we had given up on parents. But there was still some hope for the kids. In our art labs in Los Angeles and Seattle, and through our work online, we worked with a diverse group of educators and grassroots leaders to build the next set of icons and language that would be the follow-up for We the People, and that project was called We the Future. Instead of being generic faces, it was 10 specific paths to action through 10 young leaders in their organizations. They range from age 13 to 27 years old. The goal was to put art and teaching tools into 20,000 K-12 classrooms in every state. And this was really inspired by a conversation with one of the artists that you saw named Ernesto Urena. I remember Ernesto telling me a story about when he was growing up. In his classroom, he remembered always staring at these pieces of art on the wall that were put out by Apple, actually. It was like images of Gandhi and all these world leaders. It was a campaign called Think Different. And it just branded itself in his brain because it was always there. It was omnipresent. It just, when there's good imagery in the classroom, it doesn't get taken down off the walls. It just keeps transmitting. And that's something I think we're missing in the digital world as we swipe by everything and everything's on an app. It doesn't stick. These teachers that are putting this work up in these classrooms, they leave it up for 3 years and the kids look at it every single day. That is an amazing thing. So right now we have only 13,500 schools signed up. Teachers signed up one-to-one on our website. This is not mass distribution, it's one-to-one sign up. We'll hit 20,000 physical classrooms by the summer. The art and lesson plans are already filling classrooms across the country. And we had to get really clever with how we distributed it because when we were sending the big tubes of art, it was costing like $15 or $20 to send a tube of art with all the printing and shipping. So we started to make our own newspaper. We managed to print large enough quantity and do mass mailers. We were able to put these out for I think about $3.50 a piece with printing and shipping. And so these are big foldouts. A lot of the teaching tools are in here, and the others are in digital downloads that each classroom gets for free. They fold out, and then the teachers are laminating and putting these up on the walls and integrating them into some of their digital lessons also. And so they come with these teaching toolkits. Some of them are really well developed, like Amanda and her organization. They've been building very specific middle school lesson plans and high school lesson plans. They have real stuff that can be integrated into curriculum. Not all of the groups have that. Some of them are just setting up teaching tools that are just like how to get a little bit more involved. Youth literacy projects from the Youth Poet Laureate of America and her organization. But this is really inspiring a lot of young kids. Right now, this is the central exhibit at the Gates Center in Seattle, Washington right now. So it's roaming around on a lot of buses, and it just continues its distribution. Everybody that goes to the exhibit gets free analog art digital toolkits. Our next big move is a partnership with Microsoft and one of their companies called Flipgrid, and this is going to really change the game. We are going to have a channel in Flipgrid that is going to give us access to 1.4 million American teachers. That doesn't mean we'll guarantee to get to all 1.4 million, but with support from Microsoft and Flipgrid, I think we can increase our classrooms easily into the 6 figures before the end of the year. And that's an incredible impact. And that's just in the US. They have 1.7 million classrooms overseas. We're also doing experiments in my Nat Geo work. I'm doing a lot of work in augmented reality and virtual reality. So I've got a little experiment I'm doing where I want to take some of this work and create augmented reality activations that can be activated from any iPhone or iPad. Because a lot of these classrooms have like an iPad cart, or the teachers are using tools like Flipgrid. It's a camera-based app. So what we're in the middle of building right now is if you were to use one of these apps and to scan this image, it reads it as though this were a QR code. And this piece of art is going to start talking to you. And if it's like a sticker on a water bottle, you'll still see your water bottle, but the piece of art will start talking. It'll still look like a Shepherd Fairy piece. So the coders are right in the middle of this right now, but I can show you a little sneak peek. All they have really done are the eyes. And you can see some of the outline of the face. But they've taken rotoscope animation, and we've refilmed this young icon, Shanteska, at my house. We filmed him giving a short talk, and they're using rotoscope animation technology to map his face and to create it into a lifelike cartoon in the style of Shepherd Fairy's art. So they're like 5% of the way through, but you'll be able to get an idea of it.
The climate crisis is the defining issue of our time, but it's also our generation's greatest opportunity to come together. We are flooding the streets, the courthouses, and the voting booths by the millions. The power to make a difference doesn't just come from political leaders. It comes from young people like you. Your voice and your place in these movements is just as important, if not more so than any political leader. The way that you use your voice matters. Sometimes it can feel really hard to know where to start. But the cool thing is that regardless of how small your actions are at the beginning, you are not alone. We need your brilliance to help us imagine and build the future that we know is possible. We, the future, are Earth Guardians. Join us.
So imagine that. Imagine it looking exactly like that, but talking. And imagine if you saw this as a mural on a wall walking down the street, and you went over it with your phone and it started talking to you. So you would still see the building, you would still see the sky, but just the painted area would start talking to you. The same thing if it was on a water bottle, the back of a computer, and we can gamify this. We can get it so that one leads to another, to another, to another, to another. And so we're going to start playing with that this year, and this is just really like the prototype. I'll show you 1 minute. We're almost at the time, which is great because I'm on my last 2 slides. This is my son, Hawkeye Huey. One of the movements that I think has the most momentum right now is the youth climate movement. And the same studio that did that rotoscope animation, we worked with them to make an animated film driving kids to the youth climate strike. There's 1.5 minute video here.
I keep hearing about climate change, but I think it's a climate crisis, and I'm kind of freaked out. The forests are burning, heat waves, droughts, and storms are getting worse, and the ice sheets are melting faster than ever. If we don't act soon, if we don't cut greenhouse gas emissions, we won't be able to grow the food we need. Whole cities will be underwater, and up to 1 billion people could become climate refugees in the next 30 years.
You're not scared enough, and you're not doing enough.
We can install solar panels and new light bulbs. We can buy local. We can ride bikes. But the climate crisis is so big that we can't solve it through small acts alone. We need our governments to take real action. I'm a kid. Why should I have to be the one fighting for this? You, our politicians, should be doing this. But you aren't. You keep doing the wrong thing. You keep choosing money over our future. It's gone so far that we kids had to take you to court and sue the government. We need to start from the bottom up, on farms, in homes, in schools, and from the top, with real climate policy and real laws, and we need it all now. For decades, you've known about this threat. You've chosen to do nothing.
Now we're having to leave our classrooms to strike.
If you don't start to fix this, we will continue. Because remember, in the next few years, when we're old enough, we will be voting. And and we won't be voting for you.
So that was just a little prototype for what we could potentially do with animation. And one of the things we're really interested in is, can we do things like take big murals and then bring those murals to life through an augmented reality animation, where that animation could act both as a short film, but could have a three-dimensionality that you could walk around and interact with a camera-based device. So there's a lot coming up for us. And the very last thing that I'll give you a sneak peek of is that, and because this is really about, a tipping point, is, as in the lead up to 2020 and to this election, I think a lot of us have been searching for what's the movement that's going to wake people up to everything we need to wake up to. There's a lot right now. Along with 100 other organizations and artists, we're looking to launch a new movement that comes from our distant past. 160 years ago, as the United States careened towards a civil war, a movement of young patriots, now long forgotten, launched a movement to wake up the country. They were called the Wide Awakes. The Wide Awakes were young Republicans. They were mechanics, laborers, and clerks who opened their eyes, stood up, and marched in the streets by the tens and eventually hundreds of thousands, agitating for a presidential candidate named Abraham Lincoln and pushing for the abolition of the slave trade in the U.S. The nation had to choose whether liberty or slavery would be the law of the land, and the Wide Awakes chose liberty. It was a time from our history when young Republicans were the far left of America. So this is a really interesting question to ask. What does it mean to be awake in this century? It's a question worth asking every day, I think, and it's one of those where the answer evolves constantly. It can't necessarily be answered very concretely. But what we do know is that being awake is not about one country or topic or political idea. Anyone can be a wide awake. You don't get it from a channel, you don't get it from a political party or a pulpit. You find it yourself. It's your eye to open. So if you start seeing these eyes around, you'll know where they came from. We're hoping to print up about 5 million eyes in various forms. We're going to launch an open call. Shepard's working on some right now. So 6,000 versions of the eyes and 5 million copies will soon be showing up on campus. So I'm really excited to answer some questions. Thank you guys for sticking with me through that winding narrative. I hope it made sense.
I was going to ask you to talk about the face.
The face? Which face?
Every face.
Every face?
Your imagery, right?
The face.
Faces.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was thinking it was about the eyes, and now there's the eye.
The eye.
So can you talk about your commitment to that gripping, addressing face in your work?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, when we start these ideas, with the people, we know it's got to be people, but we don't know who is it. And so we started a bunch of commissions and building without having the imagery. We just started sending photographers into communities to wait to see what images spoke to us and that had the most power behind them or had the ability to be a transformative image. So this is really hard stuff to blueprint. We're really throwing ourselves out there and just pulling in as much as we can and then sorting it. And in that sorting, trying to be maybe that's the one that'll stick. I don't know really how else to describe it. And I mean, some of them are much more coordinated where if we're working with an organization who's got young leadership, they're gonna often put one of their young leadership up, and then it's about the artist's ability to transform that into an inspiring portrait. But yeah, that people-based imagery is what really makes people feel this work.
And the language comes from your organization?
The language comes from, we do these things, like I said, we call them language labs, where we get together, but we get together with the organization, and if there's an organization that we want to work with, we'll often ask them for a kind of manifesto. And sometimes they don't really have one, and we're like, well, you need to come up with one. We need a paragraph from you that sort of says everything you believe. And then you have to take that one paragraph and you have to give us one sentence that really says everything you believe. And then we'll start working with you from that to find out what the most powerful language is to put out. And we just ran a thing like that recently with the Ford Foundation. They had a project called Realizing Democracy that just was very heady, huge language, and all the smartest people in the country working on strengthening democracy, and we had to figure out how to translate it down into 3 to 7 words at a time, and powerful imagery. I mean, I didn't show any of that stuff, but there's just so much happening like that. We're about to work on a project with the founders of B Corp and Imperative 21, which is a group that controls $15 trillion in assets, to come up with language and imagery to make us think about redesigning capitalism. How do we think differently about how we participate in that? Like, that's going to be a lot of really big ideas that we're going to have to, how do you turn that into a picture and 3 to 7 words? It's a really interesting process to get to that. But yeah, we'll do multiple sessions. We'll like do an initial meeting where we try and just like get all of the language to get dumped out and all the concepts, and then we start reading through it and feedback in smaller pieces, and then hit it again in another physical gathering often.
Thank you so much for a fabulous talk and all the compelling images and stories. I found myself thinking about like the history of anthropology and fears even about, say, long ago about capturing the soul in photography, and how that's kind of turned around these days into like capturing facial recognition and privacy, and how in fact you are capturing the soul, but in the best of possible ways when the pictures start to speak back at you. So that's really amazing, as well as how like an image can really objectify someone, but this is not at all what you're doing. Your images, they look back, they stare back, and I think what Susan was saying about the face too, they kind of like grip you by the throat and they talk back. So I just think that that's so powerful. I also think it's really valuable what you're doing in addressing younger generations. In the work that I do, I feel very strongly about that, and know about historical periods that have done that too. And technology is fabulous, but I just also wanted to put in a plug for the old-fashioned forms. I think one of the most hardiest forms of the printed book is the youngest generation, and picture books can really enable conversations. They're also finding that the people who can persuade older generations to change are their children, right? Yeah. So a picture book can, like of images like this, can actually enable a conversation, an intergenerational conversation between a child and a parent. So I just wanted to put in a plug for that, to embed them in picture books too, to reach the very youngest generation.
Tell me what you mean by picture books. We are making coloring books, and we've been working on stuff like that for a while. When you say picture book, what do you mean?
I mean a book that has, where image and text are an equal part, but so it could be even a compilation of these kinds of images, and then parents talk to their children about them. But also I'm thinking, I actually am a scholar of like Russian, the Russian avant-garde and childhood. And so I've thought about how alphabets have often been used in various periods to re-educate people. So I think an alphabet could be a wonderful theme too. Like A is for activism, B is for and so on.
Yeah, we need to work on our children's book series. There are only 3.5 of us on staff, and I'm the half. So we need a lot more people working on this team. We could definitely be cranking out some cool children's books. That would be fun. Who's in charge of this picking process? I don't want to jump in.
I have a comment and a question. My one comment is I think you could do some language labs with some Democratic candidates. That would be awesome.
Yeah. So one of the things that we have to decide is like, we have somebody right now that wants to fund us to create a 501c4 to work on the eventual candidate, and I don't know how I'm going to have time to do that. And currently can't do that as a 501c3, but it's like it's in our vision right now. Like whenever that is ultimately decided, will we work on whoever that candidate is? Because right now we can work on things like general gun reform and general environmental protection, but we can't say vote for SB 70. We can't say vote for this particular candidate, but we're looking at that.
So my question was, going back to your journalist portion, when you started your work with for language, how did you go in? Because you didn't know.
Naively.
Naively, yeah. I mean, how did you go in? Because part of the problem as like a white man
Sure.
going in. How do you get people to open up and trust you at the beginning of a project like that?
I think I looked so helpless that people were really worried for my safety in some very dangerous towns, and I was just adopted to save my life. And a lot of people just really want to have attention put on them, and they're lonely and they want people to talk to, and maybe they don't even feel safe having people talk to their own family, especially if they're in really broken homes, and so they have somebody come in and say, I want to know how you feel, I want to know where these feelings and ideas come from, or instead of coming and saying, I've got a story to tell about you, I try in all of these cases to say, what is the story you want me to tell? And if you come in through that, come with your head low like that and say, what is the story you want me to tell? You would not believe what people are going to say. It's amazing. That's how good journalism happens. I don't know anything. I don't know anything about any of these subjects, actually. I'm not an expert on education or on the environment or on gun reform. So we always come in low and we ask people to tell us what they know and what we're supposed to be talking about. And then we sort through it, and then we become the architects of really like distribution strategy and language craft and aesthetics. But we are never the expert on the topic. I'm like an aesthetic filter over other people's knowledge.
Yeah, so I teach in Chicano Studies here, and I just want to tell you a little story about the film that accompanied the Pine Ridge experience, Honor the Treaties, which I think was about 14 minutes, something like that.
Oh man, that was old. That was the beginning. That was before there was a blueprint.
Yeah, so there was this, I don't know how I did a Facebook, something like that. Anyway, I teach Chicano Studies here. I teach a class called Racism, American History. I taught it for years. And the HBO film, Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, came out in maybe 07, 08. And so that ends obviously with 1890, with the massacre, right? And so then your film kind of fell on my lap. And so putting those two things together, so the students they're required to watch the full 2 hours of the film, and then they watched your film. And then what came out of that was not just the film itself, was your emotion. And I wanted to go back to that just for a second, because you captured that here, but you also do that on the film. So you have this kind of, I hate to say it, at least it's my impression, this authenticity, this like voice that comes through, that it's not, you're not just going through the motions, right? So that really draws people in. It's not just the pictures. The pictures definitely get through, but it's like your emotion gets through it, and you're not just playing a game. You're not just taking pictures. You said, I'm going to take a side. And then there's a line in that film where you say that people are like picking through the bones. I can't remember the exact quote of that. And the students just really were kept in rapt attention by that. So it's more of a comment of gratitude. And I know that I'm not trying to like fan them or something like that, but I'm grateful for you to make this and for you to even show up here today. The other part, and then I have a more kind of like real question, is the immigration issue, because we talk about immigration a lot just in general, but especially in Chicano Studies, obviously, is that there's this father and daughter were basically died in the Rio Grande back in June.
Oh yeah, that image, they're both face down in the water.
So I went over and went to our local, Albertsons or something. They let me had a copy of the New York Times. So I said, I've got to buy the goddamn New York Times because I need to see this stupid picture. I've already seen it like a jillion times, but like the picture you showed for a different reason about the March for Our Lives, so I needed to see that. But part of what I want to ask you is, and what the art is that there's a line in Ezekiel which I really like. It's called transforming hearts of stone into hearts of flesh. So, a lot of people say, well, the problem with bleeding hearts is your heart's always bleeding. So what we want to do, I think, is the activists, the impulse is to almost do like open heart surgery and assume that the person has a heart. So we'll like blow them up and we'll make them awake. Well, what if they don't want to be awake? What if we show them images like that image, and we show them the little boy that died in Syria with his face down, was 4 years old? There's so many images. The girl in the picture from the 1970, the Vietnam War, where napalm, she's running through the streets naked. Sometimes I worry about that. Not about like, what you're doing, what I'm doing, is we want to wake people up, but do they really want to be awake?
No, it's the human condition. Like I think any Buddhists in the room would know that it's like that we're not going to escape suffering. So a lot of this, I don't know if it will make a difference. I do it for my sanity. Like I do it so that I have a way to be able to do something in the midst of this kind of civil war, that like at least I have tools and I can make beauty and wage beauty, right? And I think that's why I do it. I don't know if any of it's gonna work. I mean, it whips up a lot of energy. It's a kind of propaganda. It's a positive propaganda. It's slanted to the good, but I don't ultimately know if that, I hope, but I don't know. I just gotta keep making it. Thanks for your comments.
Can I just find out, you said the youth and climate is really on the rise, and then you showed us a clip, a movie, I loved it. How do I access that? Is it through their organization or Amplifier?
Yeah, where would, I mean, what's the web domain for that? We're gonna be putting it out on the Amplifier streams as we build up to the next youth climate strikes as well.
Okay.
I believe, I don't know if you know the domain that's called bit.ly, that's like a shortener of domains, you know what I'm talking about? You can find that at bit.ly/climate crisis action. Climate crisis action, it's not www, it's bit.ly climate crisis action. But if you went to any of the Amplifier social platforms and you scroll back just a little bit, you'd be able to see it and it'll probably tell you how to get to it.
Okay, thank you.
But hopefully we'll push it and push it and push it some more.
Just at the risk of over-interpreting.
Yeah, go take the risk, I'm ready.
I think that your work is, I mean, I think what's important in terms of the human emotion that you described is that your work isn't photographic. Your work is a translation into images, and the humanness, there's sort of, you're looking at someone but it's not someone. You're creating a space in which people can be addressed, and the emotion comes through the fact that these are drawn images, or the human imprint is on the medium. And I think that's important because you're addressing but you're distanced. You're creating a space for people to enter into. Do you understand what I'm saying? It's not a photograph. It's not so direct.
Yeah, and I struggle sometimes with not making pictures because I take huge swaths of time now where I'm not making pictures or photographing, and sometimes I stop and I'm like, oh my God, am I supposed to be doing this still? But I continue the same kind of work through all of these other mediums. It just, I don't have a particular allegiance to a singular medium. If the best medium to translate that emotion is an analog poster, then so be it. And if it's an augmented reality piece that has the voices of the elders interpreting ancestral Pueblo sites, then it is going to be augmented reality. And if it's a flat National Geographic photograph in a magazine, then maybe that will be it again at some point. But it's moving around where I'm trying to connect the emotion and the energy to some kind of imagery that will move something.
So thank you so much for your talk and for sharing your work with us here. So I have a question kind of on the formats thing and on the coming in low thing that you just mentioned. So, I work with zines and creating zines, and a lot of the work that I do with zines is in non-academic settings. And one of the—
It's in what settings?
Non-academic settings, but also in academic settings. And one of the barriers that I've encountered for folks is folks who don't feel creative and feel like they don't know how to express themselves creatively. And I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about, it sounds like you work with many artists, but in terms of translating that work, it's one thing to be able to appreciate the value of a piece, and it's a different thing to say, I can do that too. So is that something that you've encountered in your work, especially where the storytelling comes in, because that is where folks connect a lot of times to art. So if that's something that you can speak to a little bit.
You mean like how do we engage with people who think they might not be able to?
Yeah, and like how do you connect with folks who maybe have that sort of, I feel like that barrier exists for folks who are like, oh, well, I'm not an activist because activists do that, or I'm not an artist because artists do that.
Well, I think that's why it's not everybody's role to make art in that form, but it's just why I think a lot of the gatherings that we would do in our art lab or our public space or in language labs bring in people with all kinds of worldviews and talents, where we're not expecting them to make the physical art, but we're asking them to give words and like lend their emotion, and then we pare that down and refilter and retranslate that into what people eventually end up seeing. Like, I think we always try and make that group as big as possible to bring in everybody's best skills, because it's just not everybody's job to do aesthetic filtering. And nobody should feel that pressure to be like, well, I feel bad that I can't be an aesthetic filter. There's other ways to contribute for sure. I'm not sure if I'm answering that very well, but yeah, I mean, this is a time to take risks. Like, I don't know how, I'm not much in the streets, like encouraging people on a one-on-one level to like take a risk and make a zine or take a risk and try to make a piece of art. But I hope that that this would be a year to make those risks, to take those.